Hello students, today's topic for our video class is community structure and dynamics, ecological succession. So here community structure, what are we exactly going to talk about is about the plants and animals in the ecosystem, the types of the plants and animals in the ecosystem, the number of species that are present and how they are interacting with one another in the ecosystem is called community structure. And what is dynamics? Dynamics is how they are going to survive. Interacting with one another is called dynamics. And ecological succession is how they are going to grow, develop and flourish is what we are going to talk about in this particular topic. So, we will talk about what community structure is exactly. It is a description of community members and the relative abundance. That is, how many are there are present over there, what is their population and what is their relative abundance is what is about community structure. Then what is community dynamics? The changes that occur over the time and space in a community. Even though the communities have an underlying structure, the structure may change over time. That is, the dynamics is how they are going to grow and flourish themselves is what is about dynamics. Now, if you can see the picture, we are going to talk about one organism, that is a deer is present over here. If it is a single one, you are going to call it as an organism, but if there are a number of them, then you call it as a deer population. In the same way, in the next level, you will find that there are too many animals over there. You can find the deer, you can find a tiger, you can find the ox, you can find lion under the tree and all those along with the trees over there. Then you call them as community. And this community, when they are interacting with the ecosystem, then you call it as an ecosystem. So, on whole, the whole of the ecosystem where the number of population, the number of community is present is what we are going to talk about under community structure and dynamics. So, a community is made up of all population of various species that dwell in the same area, interact, whereas a population is a collection of creatures from the same species living in the same region and interacting with one another. So, they have to interact with one another and only then they can flourish. So, in a simpler terms, community is where plants and animals live together in an environment. So, if you can just see the picture, so this is a ocean ecosystem where you can find different types of fishes present over there with along with the plants that is present, algae that is present in the picture. So, this is a community of tropical fishes. So, this is called a community structure where they are interacting within the ecosystem. Now, ecosystem is formed from the interaction of a community of organisms with their environment. In each ecosystem, there is an energy flow and a food chain that works together. And all ecosystems have animal, plants, insects in their natural habitat. So, that is what is called as ecosystem, where energy flow has to go on from one tropical level to the next tropical level, and that the energy flows from producers to consumers. And of course, decomposers will bring back all those energy back to the ecosystem where the plants utilize them. So, that is about ecosystem. Now, in a community structure, there have to be an interaction among the population that are present in the community. So, what is called as community interaction? It is a group of interacting population all living in the same place at the same time. And the focus is on the interaction between species or population, including competition, predation, succession, invasion and mutualism. Now, what is all this competition, predation is all about? Now, when you are talking about the interaction, if you can see the picture, we have a deer, we have a fox, we have some rabbits over there and also some parasites over there, and also you find some plants or trees around in the picture. Now, when you are talking about herbivores, the rabbit and a deer, they are going to have the grass as consumers. Now, of course, the plants are the producers over there. Now, when there is an interaction between these animals, the rabbits and the deer are herbivores, they have to eat the grass. Now, between these two, there is a competition, that is what you call it as competition between herbivores. Now, if it was the carnivores, then there is a competition between carnivorous animals like a tiger, a hyena or a fox and all those stuff. Predation, that is what we call as predation. When there a predation is, that is when they are going to eat the herbivore animals, it is called as predation. Now, the predation also there is a competition, that is between a lion and a hyena, they have to be a competition over there in a predation. Succession, that is which one is going to be dominant, how they are going to produce, how they are going to become abundance is called as succession. Invasion, when you are talking about invasion, that is when you have some foreign species inhabiting an indigenous species is called as invasion. For example, if you see in and around the lakes in our city, you find that Eichhornia is an invasion species, though it is not indigenous, it is mostly from South America. Now, this has invaded our area and they are overtaking our indigenous plants. So, that is called invasion. Mutualism, an understanding between two species without hurting one another is called mutualism. That is, for example, if you are going to talk about sea anemones, there you have this fishes, the clownfish inhabiting the sea anemones. How are they going to interact with each other? Sea anemones are having stinging rays which are poisonous that can kill other animals so that they can feed. But the clownfish has have an immunity towards this stinging rays, so they are able to stay in the sea anemone, taking the shelter, providing them with the excreta that is nutritious for the sea anemone, and the sea anemone in turn is going to protect the clownfish. So, that is called mutualism. So, you are going to see how they are going to interact with each other. And of course, there are parasitism, the parasites which has to survive in a host so that they can grow in number. So, this is community interaction. Now, this community has following characters, they have to have some characters: species diversity and dominance, community composition, ecological niche, community stability, ecotone and edge effect, factor compensation and ecotype, and community stratification. So, we are going to talk about all this briefly so that you will understand and you will be able to write an answer about what is community structure and dynamics. So, first one we will talk about species diversity and dominance. Diversity, that is how many number of species are present and how many varieties are present in an ecosystem is called species diversity, and which one is going to be dominant among them is called as dominance. So, all organisms in a community are equally important. Some species exert influence by virtue of their number, size, production, etc. So, that is they are going to exert an dominance over each other. Some species are found only in one community, exclusive species is what you call them as, whereas others live in many communities, you call them as ubiquitous species. When you are talking about exclusive endemic species, the example over there in the picture is koala species. Now, this is a marsupial which you find only in an Australian continent and nowhere else in the world. So, they become exclusive species, that is they are adapted only to that particular ecosystem or climatic condition. So, they are called exclusive species. Now, when you are talking about ubiquitous, you will find some species present all over the world. The best example is a pigeon over there. You can also have rats around, the mosquitoes of course. So, these are ubiquitous species wherein wherever you go, to whichever corner you go in the world, you will find this particular species. So, we will talk about diversity over there. So, what is exactly diversity? So, for example, if I say when you are talking about two different ecosystems, in one ecosystem you will find 50 species of trees and animals. In another ecosystem you will find 100 species or in that ecosystem. So, what do you call them? The diversity is more in the 100 species than in the 50 species, that is called diversity. So, the diversity is a number of relative organisms of the same species present in an ecosystem and the relative abundance of each of those. So, relative abundance, when you are talking about relative abundance, if a community, even though it is having 50 species, their abundance is say around 1000, And in other species, when you are talking about 100 species, if their abundance is only about 500, then you call the ecosystem which is having more number of species, you call it as abundance. So, here we can talk about them as species richness and species evenness. What is richness? That is the number of species present in an ecosystem, that is the diverse number of, more number of diverse species present in an ecosystem is called species richness, and evenness is when the equal number of plants or animals that are present in that particular species or a particular community, you call it as evenness. So, the species diversity varies in different geographical locations on the earth, with the tropics having highest diversity, and it is declining as we move towards the pole. Now, why you think that we have more number of species in the tropics? The tropics is because they are having proper rainforests, they have proper vegetations, they have proper protection for the animals, so they can dwell and produce in large numbers. So, you find number of species diversities in the tropical region. Now, as you move towards the pole on either side, Arctic and Antarctic, the climatic condition is too rough, it is too cold. So, you do not find much of plantation, much of producers over there, and the weather condition does not suit all species to thrive in that. So, you have less number of species diversities on the polar regions. Now, what is the importance of species diversity? So, why we are talking about so much of species diversity? It has to maintain a balance in the ecosystem, and it also has to depend on one another directly or indirectly, and more diverse ecosystem tends to be more productive, and greater species richness and productivity makes an ecosystem more sustainable and stable, so that they are able to withstand any type of ecological disturbances. The greater the ability to withstand environmental stress, and humans also get a lot of resources like fruits, vegetables, dyes, millets, medicines, antibiotics, etc., because we have to survive within the ecosystem. And of course, not to forget the microorganisms, the bacteria, and of course, the plants which help the nitrogen cycle, and the earthworms also contribute to the soil fertility. Now, dominance, when you are talking about dominant species, these are the most abundant, or they have the highest biomass, that is the more the number, the larger the size, the more the biomass they have to give back to the ecosystem. And the dominant species exert powerful control over the occurrence and disturbances of other species. That is, this dominant species have a control on other species, whether they are going to bloom excessively or whether they are going to be kept under check, is what is called as dominant species exerting powerful control. So, here in this picture, if you can see the polar bears, these polar bears are dominant only in the polar region, and they cannot survive in other places. So, the dominance of them will keep a check of other species from growing overpopulation. In the next one, you can see that is the sphagnum moss, which is growing in the bogs, that is in the marshy areas. So, these are dominant species over there. And of course, the mangroves, no other plants can grow other than the mangroves in the which is a dominant species in the marine and the terrestrial regions. Now, I want to talk about one more important keystone species over here. So, in the picture, if you can see, you can see a starfish or a sea star that is present over there. Now, this sea star you find mostly in the western part of America, United States of America. Now, what happens is when they are present in the area of that ecosystem, oceanic ecosystem, they keep the mussels under control, because the mussels are they are going to prey on the mussels, and they are kept under check. Now, once we remove this mussels from the starfish, that is a dominant species, the starfish from that ecosystem, you will find an excessive growth of mussels in that area, and these mussels will stop the growth of other algae and barnacles, thereby reducing the species diversity. So, you can see now, by disturbing one population, we are disturbing the whole ecosystem in that area. So, sea star is a keystone species which keep other species under control, and the growth is also well maintained. The next point is community composition. In a community composition, the size, the trophic structure, and the number and variety of species are going to be discussed over here. Now, we are going to talk about the size. Communities may be large, covering thousands of square kilometers, that is oceanic community or desert community, and Some may be small like a lake and some may have still smaller communities. So, that is, the larger the area, the larger the size of the community. So, a simple example is the ocean, where you have a number of communities in the oceanic, and in desert community you have all the desert animals that can survive in them. Now, when you are talking about micro environment, it can be as small as a horseshoe crab with a dozen species of molluscan and barnacles growing and attached onto its shell. So, you can see over there all the barnacles and the molluscans that is attached. Now, this is called a micro community. So, it depends on the larger the size or the smaller size community structure, how many types are going to be surviving on what is the species diversity. What is a trophic structure? So, we all know the trophic structure is a food chain where the movement of energy is from the producers to the consumers. So, all the major community is the plants, because they are going to be the producers to produce the food products from the sunlight by photosynthesis. So, most of the plants are consistent in their position, that is, they take the base of the pyramid, and the other animals follow them, that is the producers, the consumers, the secondary consumers and the decomposers. Now, there are some animals which keep changing its trophic level, is called a trophic structure. What? For example, a simple example is a frog. Now, the frog during its life cycle, the tadpoles are herbivores, and once the tadpole metamorphoses to an adult frog, they change themselves into carnivore. So, there is a change in the trophic structure. First they are herbivores in the tadpole, and then they become carnivore as they grow into an adult. So, that is trophic structure. Number and variety of species. Each community maintains a perfect balance between producers and consumers, and each trophic level may be represented by one, few or many species depending on the diversity and the number. Deep sea or desert may have few species with a small number of individuals, but some habitats have less number of species but more of individuals. So, it can depend on the ecosystem and of course, the place they are living in. Ecological niche. Now, this is also a very important topic over here. What is a niche? Niche is something where a particular individual or a particular species will take over that particular place, wherein the other species cannot fill up that particular position. That is, they fit perfect in that particular niche, is called as ecological niche. So, here we are going to talk about one particular example, that is a dung beetle life cycle. Now, we must have all seen in a village or wherever there is dung, you will find these dung beetles rolling those organic matter into a small ball like structures, and they keep them in a burrows. Now, what they exactly do with these balls is they lay their eggs in those particular dung, and then the nourishment is given through that particular dung, that is, they have micronutrients in this dung, and the larva hatches to pupa, and pupa emerges as an adult, and the life cycle continues, whereby they keep on rolling this dung and they place them in this particular burrows. What is the function of all this particular one? As you are making those balls, they are trying to take those micronutrients and preserving them under the soil, so that that particular area becomes very nutrient for a proper development of the plants to grow in them. And if you have proper plants, then you have proper herbivores which can survive in them. If we did not have this dung beetles, then this particular micronutrients would have been lost in the atmosphere. So, it is having its own niche, that is ecological niche. The same way, if you can see the birds over here, you have some flamingos over there which can filter feed within the shallow waters, and they try to eat some mussels, they try to eat some small fishes present in them. But a little bit further from the shallow waters, you find these ducks, they can go upside down to collect the insects, small insects in them. And when you come a little bit on top, you have avocets which can filter feed the insects, that is, they, with the help of their strong beak, they are able to swift the mud, and they are going to try to take the insects over there. And of course, in the same way, there are some other birds which can feed on the beach or the shore region. So, these are the ecological niche, only those particular species can perform that particular function. And we can, when we are talking about this ecological niche, sometimes there can be an overlap of these niches. What is this overlap? That is, when two species are going to eat that same type of food, then you call them as overlap. For example, over here if you can see in the picture, you have a lion and a hyena, they both have the same type of diet. Now here they both are going to compete with the same type of food. The dominance is whichever is going to be dominant will affect the other species to survive or not. Sometimes they can be eliminated or sometimes they can be kept under check. Then of course, the lions are going to be the dominant ones and they are going to have a check on the hyenas in that particular area. Now, when you are talking about the overlap, you can also talk about ecological equivalence. That is, two animals can feed the same food, but they can be in a separate region. So, in the example over here is antelope of North America and in the same type kangaroos of Australia. You do not have kangaroos in the North America, you do not have antelopes in Australia. That is, they are going to be present in two different ecological conditions and they are going to eat the same type of herbivores, but there is no competition because they are away from each other. That is called as equivalent or ecological equivalent. So, these are some of the examples of ecological niche in the ecosystem, and sometimes you also have omnivores, that is they are going to feed on herbivores, they can be herbivorous, they can be carnivorous, they can be omnivorous, and definitely the best example is humans, and of course, you have other examples like the pigs, crows and opossums that are present in the universe. Community stability. So, they have to be stable. The community, even if they are there, they have to be stable. Such communities like tropical rainforest and coral reefs are stable. Why coral reefs? The coral reefs are the ones that is present in the ocean. These are going to sometimes become hard shells and they form the shelter for green algae and the brown algae to grow in them, and they are not disturbed by the oceanic currents. So, coral reefs. Tropical rainforest, because they are going to have abundance rain in that forest region, they are going to have abundant vegetation and there is no less for the food for the consumers to thrive on them, except when there is a little bit of environmental fluctuation. So, according to Harrison, the stability of a community is related to the micro environment and community diversity. So, the more the diverse the community, the stable that particular community is. Ecotone and edge effect. Now, this is one more very interesting topic over here. What is this ecotone and what is an edge effect over there? So, for example, if you can see in the picture over there, you have a forest land and you have also a grassland, but there is a place in between these two which converge called as ecotone. There is not much of forest plants, there is not much of grassland. So, this particular place becomes very easy for different animals to have the food over there and they can eat on them. So, for example, when you are talking about an owl can take shelter in the forest, but they can come back to grassland to feed on the rodents over there. So, the place in between, the junction between two ecosystems is called as ecotone. And the same thing happens, examples you can talk about is the mangroves also, where the mangrove forest can survive between the marine water and the terrestrial water. Only mangroves can grow and no other plants can grow. What is an edge effect? The tendency for increase in species variety and density at the ecotone or community junction is called an edge effect. So, that is what I was talking about in the example as owl, because the owl depends on forest and they depend on food on the grassland, that becomes an edge effect, that is the species, there are more number of species diversity in that particular edge effect. Factor compensation and ecotype. What is this factor compensation and ecotype? Organisms may develop certain adaptations to physical environment, that is temperature, light, water, oxygen, etc., and this is called as factor compensation. Now, what is the ecotype? The term is coined by Drusen. He defined them as a genetically different population of species which adapted to some other specific environment, and these adaptations becomes irreversible or genetically fixed. Now, what is this ecotype? What is this genetically different, though they are the same species? The example over here is polar bear. You have two types, one is a polar bear, one is a grizzly bear. A polar bear can survive in the North Pole and the South Pole, the polar regions, whereas a grizzly bear cannot survive in that cold conditions. They can survive only in the tropical or mountain regions over there. So, a polar bear can possibly survive on the both sides if there is enough food present, but a grizzly cannot survive in that cold condition. So, though they are from the same species, they have some genetical makeup which can make them survive in two different environmental conditions. Community stratification. Stratification refers to vertical and horizontal layers of organism, and the result of their activities depend on environment, that is how they are being stratified, that is they can be vertical stratification and they can be horizontal stratification. So, in a vertical stratification you find a subterranean, you find a floor, you find a herbaceous or a shrub layer where each and every community or a species can survive in this particular type of environment. In a pond ecosystem also the stratification is found as benthic, profundal, limnetic and littoral. When you are talking about horizontal stratification, you will be talking about only the horizontal sides of growth, that is one particular say understory or a canopy, all the birds surviving in them in that particular place is called as horizontal stratification. Temporal stratification is about the time period. Some animals are active during day, some are active during night and some are active during the dusk. So, this particular warblers, they are active during the daytime, the bats, they are active during the night time, that is they are nocturnal, and this particular hawks, they are active only during dusk time. So, that is a temporal stratification. Ecological succession. So, this is again a beautiful topic. What is an ecological succession? It is a process by which the mix of species and habitat in an area change over time, that is they keep changing. Gradually these communities replace one another until a climax community like a mature forest is reached, or until a disturbance like a fire, floods or volcanoes occurs. Each planet community creates conditions that are subsequently allowing different plant communities to thrive, and succession stops temporarily when a community climax community forms, and such communities remain in a relative equilibrium until a disturbance restarts the succession process. Now, what is the succession? The change in the number and kinds of organism in an area leads to a stable community and replacement of different communities. That is when they come to a succession period, that is when they are taken up by other different parts, primary succession to secondary succession. Pioneer communities are the one, that is the first community which has developed in a particular ecosystem is called pioneer community, and serial stage, any succession community between pioneer and a climax community is called a serial stage. Now, the plants over here is the pioneer community over here where you do not find any particular plants. Under types of succession, you have two types of succession, primary succession and secondary succession. What is a primary succession? If you can see in this picture, there is a volcanic eruption being formed, and after the volcanic eruption has occurred, the whole land becomes barren with only rocks and no other vegetation being seen. Or it can be a glacier. You can see in this picture over here, this is a picture during 1977 how the place is completely filled with ice, and in 2006 how a little bit of them has lessened up and you can find some plants growing over there. Now, what is primary? Now, when there is a barren land, when a small algae community grows over there, or a kelp where the brown algae is growing over there, they form the primary communities, and after the growth of the algae, a slowly production of bushes, then plants, then trees grow in them. That is called primary succession. Under secondary succession, when the primary succession is destroyed due to some disturbances in the environment, then a new variety comes up in its place is called secondary succession. So, here you can see the primary succession in this particular picture over here is an ecological succession where a newly formed area is inhabited for the first time by a group of species. This previously uninhabited barren area is usually lacking topsoil over there. So, there is no topsoil, and then the new plant grows as pioneer structure. So, now coming to the pioneer structure can grow completely to form a climax community. So, this is again an example of primary structure in a water ecosystem where there is a completely barren land. You find some algae growth over there, then after the algae falls, they form the soil around, and small emergent plants come up, and slowly the soil becomes full and the completely grown climax forest stages erupts over them. And that is a climax community where the end point is a fully flourished forest from the barren or a pioneer community. A secondary succession is when the climax community has been disturbed by various reasons, it can be a fire forest, it can be a volcanic eruption. When the whole thing is lost and again they come back to the climax community is called as secondary succession. So, that is all about ecological succession and climax communities. Thank you.